Hi guys, welcome back. I wanted to speak briefly on the history of Caribbean Creole and whether Creole is a language or a dialect because growing up as a Belizean person, I've always heard people saying that Creole is a dialect and Creole is broken English and stuff like that. So I just want to clear the air, which I'll discuss closer to the ending of this video. I don't want this video to be long, so I'll make this brief. Around the 15th century, many nations voyaged to the Caribbean. Not only the Caribbean, but they voyaged around the world, for the sole purpose of wealth creation, making money, finding resources, valuable resources that they can, export and stuff like that. And they hit the jackpot when they found the Caribbean because the Caribbean was rich in resources, cacao, sugar cane, and all those things. Anyways, so they found these things and things were blooming, business was blooming, and they just started to get greedy. And because of greed, these nations found it necessary to colonize the inhabitants of the Caribbean in order to maximize their profits because no one would just take that, standing up, someone coming from nowhere and just taking all their resources and benefiting from those resources without you. So they had to colonize the people. They did this in various different ways, religious, converting them to Catholics, forcing them through military and stuff like that. So once business started to bloom, they needed more labor, and this is when they started to buy slaves from West Africa. They uprooted these people from their homes and sold them into chattel slavery that occurred here in the Caribbean. So moving on. First, during colonialism, the enslaved people were taught that their languages were second best to the colonizers. They were taught that their languages were inadequate to those of the colonizers. And we see this even today, where Creole is second best to English, or Creole is second best to Spanish, or Creole is second best to French. It still lingers here in the Caribbean up to this day. Second, there was a language barrier between the West African slaves and those who spoke the European languages. So obviously a third language needed to be introduced in order for them to communicate. And this is when the Pidgin language came into play. The Pidgin language was a combination of vocabulary and grammar from both the European and the West African languages. So the Creole that we know now was a Pidgin language that had Geen native speakers. The Creole basically was adopted by the children of slaves as their first language, and they used it in every facet of life, on the slave plantation and stuff like that. So that's how we've come to see these various Creoles across the Caribbean, right? We have the Jamaican Patois, we have the Belizean Creole, the Haitian Creole, Papiamento, etc. And sometimes we may be unable to understand another person's Creole due to the accent and even the lexifier of that language. And when I say lexifier, I just mean like the root language or the main language. Let's look at Haiti, for example, right? Haiti's Creole was lexified by French because they were a part of the French colony, meaning that, the French colonized Haiti. And then we have Jamaica, who have an English-based Creole, right? So they were lexified by English. And that's why sometimes even people who speak English, like who are native English speakers, they somewhat understand, the Creoles that are English-based, because some of our grammar and vocabulary, literally comes from the English language itself. As a result, Creole can be seen as a symbol of our endurance. It definitely falls within the bounds of our history, and it shows the strength that the Caribbean people had. So to me, the Creole is definitely worthy of development. I'll end on this note, right? The various Creole languages meet several of the requirements to be regarded as a language, but people still consider Creole to be a dialect. And Creole is not a dialect, right? Creole is not a dialect. However, our Creole is not a form of broken English. It is a language spoken by millions of native speakers. For more information on the complexity on differentiating between languages and dialect, you guys can check out my previous video on language versus dialect. So, if Creole wasn't a language, it wouldn't have been, people wouldn't have tried to suppress the Creole language for this long. The truth is that Creole has more, people in the Caribbean prefer to speak their Creole in comparison to the English language. But the English language is being forced on us through policies. And this goes back to something that I learned, in one of my classes about language is a dialect with an army and a navy, just meaning that any language can be a dialect literally, and even English can be considered a dialect. But because the English language has political and economical support, people enforce the English language. There are policies regarding the use of the English language. That's the only difference between English being a language and Creole, and people considering Creole not to be a language, because Creole does not have the economical and the political support that English has. People look down on the Creole language, and this goes back to the fact that the Creole language stems from a slave plantation. You guys know the history of slavery, and you know what you've read about slavery and how people were oppressed during the days of slavery, and people feeling inadequate, specifically the West African people of the Caribbean, feeling inadequate because they're constantly being told that they're not good enough, that their language isn't good enough, that their practices, their culture isn't good enough. So now that we've adapted the Creole language, it's not good enough because it's not the language of our colonizers. So, guys, it's just something to think about, literally. There's no difference between these different languages. It's just the support that these languages have in comparison to other languages. And as stated in my video, language versus dialect, it is indeed complex to differentiate between a language and a dialect, because some of the rules or some of the differentiating factors that they give us to look at these languages, to look at these languages through, they intertwine. And when they intertwine, it's literally hard to distinguish. So that's where I'll end this video today, but there's much more that I'd like to say, and I think I have to be more consistent as it relates to these videos. So I'll try my best to be more consistent. But do have a great day, guys. Take care.